السلام عليكم. محاضرتنا اليوم راح نتكلم عن الأجزاء المختلفة للgastrointestinal tract أو the gut tube. During this lecture we will recognize the different parts of the gut tube, their surface anatomical landmarks, their important relations, define their blood supply, and see any important clinical anatomical correlations. بالنسبة للبلد supply احنا راح نتكلم اليوم بشكل مختصر عن blood supply لكل جزء، واكو محاضرة خاصة بالبلد supply of the GIT. المعلومات كلها راح تلقوها بالكتاب المقرر بالصفحات اللي موجودة قدامكم، واي معلومات اضافية كلينيكال او غيرها راح تكون واضحة من خلال البرزنتيشن. To begin with, we start with the abdominal part of the esophagus. You know from your study in first year that the esophagus leaves the thorax through the esophageal hiatus at the level of T10. بهذا المكان هو صاير midline. Once it enters the abdomen, this is the abdominal part, which is short, 2 to 3 centimeters. It deviates to the left before entering the stomach. And this entrance into the stomach is known as the cardiac orifice or the cardia. This part of the esophagus here is a very important area, the gastro-esophageal junction. You can see that there is no thickening of the circular muscles of the esophagus, meaning there is no anatomical sphincter. So what will prevent the gastric contents from going back into the esophagus? شنو اللي يمنع ارتجاع gastric contents إلى الاسophagus إذا ما عندي anatomical sphincter? What we have is what we call a physiological sphincter. Since there is no thickening of the circular muscles, we will depend on a number of factors that will prevent this reflex. First of all, the obliquity of the entrance. هذا الدخول المائل يمنع الرeflex. Number two, there is a ring of fat surrounding this junction that exerts some kind of pressure on the area. Number three, and importantly, is the diaphragm itself. You remember that the right crest of the diaphragm forms a sling or a loop around the esophagus, and it keeps it pulled so there will be no reflex. And finally, the intra-abdominal pressure itself. The intra-abdominal pressure keeps this area closed. If any of these factors becomes impaired, there will be reflux of the gastric content into the esophagus, and you know that the gastric fluid is an acidic fluid, so this will cause irritation of this area of the esophagus and maybe ulceration, and repeated injury to this area may lead to even to cancer. This is known as the gastro-esophageal reflux disease. Also, weakening of this area around the gastro-esophageal hiatus may cause the stomach to slide or even roll up from the abdominal cavity into the thoracic cavity, and this is a hernia known as hiatus hernia. This is a very important area because here the epithelium changes from the squamous epithelium of the esophagus into the columnar epithelium of the stomach, and repeated injury here can lead to malignant changes. This part of the esophagus, the abdominal part, is supplied by branches from the inferior phrenic arteries. It also receives blood supply from the left gastric artery. ورا الاسophagus نجي للstomach. The stomach is the most dilated part of the gut tube. It is completely intraperitoneal, connected to the liver by the lesser omentum and to the transverse colon by the greater omentum. The stomach is variable in position because it dilates and moves during digestion, but generally we can say that when it is empty or slightly full, it occupies the left hypochondrium, the epigastric region, the upper part of the umbilical region, and a small part of the left lumbar region. فيتمتد على هاي المناطق كلها. Anteriorly, As you can see, it is under cover of the left side of the rib cage and the left costal margin, the diaphragm. Here we have the anterior abdominal wall and the rectus sheath, and it's also under cover of the left lobe of the liver, anterior relations stomach. The stomach is divided into parts for anatomical and surgical reasons. The entrance of the esophagus into the stomach, this area, is known as the cardia or the cardial orifice, and the angle that the esophagus makes with the stomach is known as the cardial notch. The part of the stomach above the level of the cardia is known as the fundus, and this part is usually filled with air. أثناء الأكل during eating احنا دائما نبتلع كمية من الهواء when we are sitting erect. هذا الهواء يجمع بهاي المنطقة اللي هي fundus. The greater part of the stomach here is known as the body of the stomach, and it is the part that has the curvatures. احنا نعرف انه الstomach لها right side concavity, which is the lesser curvature, and left side convexity, which is the greater curvature. The lower end of the lesser curvature leading towards the duodenum, we have an angle, small angle, another angle known as the angular notch or the angular incisor. The distal part of the stomach is known as the pyloric part. The pyloric part begins with the entrance, which is known as the pyloric antrum. Then we have a short canal, the pyloric canal, and the distal orifice of the stomach, الفتحة النهائية اللي راح تودينا إلى الduodenum. This is the pylorus or the pyloric sphincter, and this is an anatomical sphincter. هنا أنا صاير عندي thickening of the circular layer of the smooth muscles of the stomach فيسوي sphincter. This sphincter is always closed unless the stomach needs to empty its contents into the duodenum. إذا ننظر إلى الوول مال stomach والداخل مالتها, you know from your histological study that all the gut tube is composed of two layers of smooth muscles, outer longitudinal and inner circular. In the stomach there is an additional third layer, which is an internal oblique layer, وهذا راح يساعدها على churning action مالتها, peristaltic action during digestion. The mucosa of the stomach, the mucous membrane, when we look at it by the naked eye, we can see that it is thrown into longitudinal folds. هاي الfolds نسميها the rugae of the stomach, and this will increase the surface area and allow the stomach to dilate easily. The posterior relation of the stomach is an important relation. All the structures that lie behind the stomach are known as the gastric bed. Now نقدر نشوف outline of the stomach and all the structures that lie behind it. إذا ناخذها بالترتيب, يعني مجرد بس نباوع على هاي الصورة راح نعرف هاي structures حتى لو ما موجودة عندنا بالكتاب. From above downwards we see the left cross of the diaphragm, the spleen, the left kidney, left suprarenal gland. This is an artery called the splenic artery, a very important relation. Pancreas and the transverse mesocolon. كل هذه الستركتشرز صايرة posterior to the stomach, but they are separated from it by the omental bursa or the lesser sac of the peritoneal cavity. The blood supply of the stomach depends on two sets of arteries. نتذكر إنه the stomach هي جزء من foregut, and the foregut depends in its blood supply on this artery, which is called the celiac artery or the celiac trunk. The arteries of the stomach run on the lesser and greater curvatures and supply both surfaces of the stomach, the anterior and posterior surface. The arteries on the lesser curvature are called the gastric arteries. The arteries on the greater curvature are called the gastro-epiploic or gastro-omental arteries. نفس التسمية, gastro-epiploic or gastro-omental. because these arteries will supply the stomach and the greater omentum which arises from the greater curvature. احنا راح نتكلم فقط عن source مال كل artery. احنا نقول كلها راح تطلع من ال celiac trunk. celiac trunk أول ما يطلع من abdominal aorta راح يعطيني 3 branches. A small branch to the stomach, this is the left gastric artery. An artery that runs behind the stomach going to the spleen, this is the splenic artery. And an artery that goes towards the liver, this is the common hepatic artery. وبعدين هذا common hepatic artery راح ينقسم إلى proper hepatic artery upwards and gastroduodenal artery downwards. من هسه حتى لا نخربط بالاتجاهات مالت السtomach, anything at the direction of the esophagus and the spleen, this is the left side. وباتجاه البايلورus والduodenum, this is the right side. So the left gastric artery supplies this left half and arises directly from the celiac trunk. The right gastric artery is a branch from the common hepatic artery. The right gastroepiploic or gastromental artery is the continuation of the gastroduodenal artery. The left gastroepiploic artery is a branch from the splenic artery. In some people there are additional arteries that arise from the splenic artery and supply mainly the fundus. These are called the short or posterior gastric arteries. The venous drainage is different from the arterial supply. The venous blood of the GIT has to pass through the liver before going into the inferior vena cava. والvein اللي يودي هذا الvenous blood إلى الليفر معروف اسمه portal vein. The portal vein is formed behind the first part of the duodenum and the pancreas. It is formed by the union of the splenic vein and the superior mesenteric vein. هذا هو portal vein. فإذا نرجع إلى الفينز اللي تقابل الارتريز اللي ذكرناها نفسها. The left and right gastric veins will drain directly into the portal vein. The right gastroepiploic vein will drain into the superior mesenteric vein. The left gastroepiploic vein and the short gastric veins will drain into the splenic vein. There is an important additional vein here ما إلى مقابل بالarteries. This vein is called the pre-pyloric vein of Mayo, and it is consistent in position. It runs always anterior to the pylorus, and it is used by surgeons to identify the pylorus and identify the gastroduodenal junction. After the stomach, we will come to the small intestine, and we know that the small intestine are divided into 3 parts. The first and largest part is the duodenum, then we have the jejunum, and finally the ileum. The duodenum is a fixed retroperitoneal part, while the jejunum and ileum are intraperitoneum. The jejunum forms about 2/5, the proximal 2/5 of the length of the intraperitoneal intestine, while the ileum forms the distal 3/5, and it leads into the large intestine at the cecum, at this area which is known as the ileocecal junction. So starting with the duodenum. The duodenum is C-shaped in shape. It is fixed in position because it's retroperitoneal, and it is divided into four parts. The first or superior part is 1 inch long, and it runs on the right side of L1 vertebrae. The second or descending part is about 3 inches long and runs on the right side from the level of L1 to L3. The third or inferior part, or sometimes called the horizontal part, is about 4 inches long and runs anterior to the L3, and the fourth part a short part 1 inch long, and it ascends to the left of L2 vertebra. This bend here, هاي الانحناء بين first and second part, is called the superior duodenal flexure. This bend is the inferior duodenal flexure, and the bend here between the duodenum and jejunum is called the duodenojejunal flexure or duodenojejunal junction. If we look at the inside of the duodenum, first of all we see that the mucosa of the duodenum is thrown into circular folds. هاي circular folds لها اسم بالاناتومي نسميها the plicae circularis. The first part of the duodenum is usually smooth, does not have these circular folds. وهذا the first part اللي هو the most dilated part is intraperitoneal, the first inch, and is known as the duodenal cap or duodenal ampulla. It is surrounded by peritoneum and connected to the liver by the hepatoduodenal ligament, which contains these structures. It is a portal triad, portal vein, hepatic artery, and bile duct. The rest of the duodenum is retroperitoneal, and we can see that in the rest of the duodenum the mucosa is thrown into the circular fold, مو مثل السtomach longitudinal fold. In the second part, we also have two important features. We have the openings of the ducts of the glands which are associated with the GIT. The glands associated with the GIT are liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. The liver and gallbladder will secrete the bile through a duct known as the bile duct. And the pancreas has two ducts, a main pancreatic duct and an accessory pancreatic duct. The bile duct and the main pancreatic duct will join together and will open here through one opening about the middle of the second part of the duodenum, and as they open they will raise the epithelium. هنا يرتفع الابيثيليوم فيسوي لي شيء نسميه the major duodenal papilla. And this point, this is an important point, this is the point of junction of the foregut and the midgut. قبلها هو كله foregut وبعدها هو midgut. About 1 inch proximal to the major duodenal papilla is another opening, smaller opening. This opening is of the accessory pancreatic duct, وهي نسميها minor duodenal papilla. The important relations of the duodenum, it is on the posterior abdominal wall, retroperitoneal. So anteriorly it will be covered by the intraperitoneal structures, and posteriorly it will be related by the other structures of the posterior abdominal wall. Here we can see the first and second parts of the duodenum. The first part is anterior to the portal triad, hepatic artery, bile duct, portal vein, and the superior duodenal flexure is partially covered by the gallbladder. The first part is also below the level of the epiploic foramen. It is above the head of the pancreas. The second part becomes on the right side of the pancreas, and it is also crossed by the transverse colon and the transverse mesocolon. The third and fourth part, the third part has an important relation. Anteriorly it is related by the superior mesenteric vessels. They cross it anteriorly, and posteriorly it runs across the inferior vena cava and the abdominal aorta. The fourth part, ascending part, as it joins the jejunum, then the duodenum هو retroperitoneal, covered by peritoneum only on its anterior surface, while the jejunum here is intraperitoneal. Here the peritoneum at the duodenojejunal junction, it will lift and circle around the esophagus towards the diaphragm, forming this ligament. This is known as the suspensory ligament of the duodenum, and in some people it contains muscle fibers. فنسميها the suspensory muscle of the duodenum. It keeps this junction suspended by the diaphragm around the esophagus. The arterial blood supply of the duodenum will come from two sources, لأنه احنا قلنا at the level of the major duodenal papilla قبلها foregut، فراح نعتمد بالبلد سبلاي على celiac trunk، وبعدها عندي midgut، فراح نعتمد على هذا الارتري اللي هو superior mesenteric artery. From the foregut we have this artery which is the common hepatic artery. common hepatic artery يعطيني هنا branch اسمها gastroduodenal artery. والgastroduodenal artery راح ينقسم إلى supraduodenal supplies this flexure، وهذا الارتري اللي اسمه superior pancreatico-duodenal artery، من اسمه راح يزود pancreas and duodenum. superior pancreatico-duodenal artery ينقسم إلى two branches anterior and posterior، فيصير اسمه anterior superior pancreatico-duodenal و posterior superior pancreatico-duodenal. يقابلهم من الأسفل بس من السوبيريور ميزنتريك artery نفس الشيء. هنا أنا راح يطلع عندي artery هنا أنا مبين خلف الاستامك اسمه inferior pancreatico-duodenal artery. هذا الانفيريور pancreatico-duodenal أيضا ينقسم إلى two branches anterior inferior pancreatico-duodenal و posterior inferior pancreatico-duodenal. You can see that they are all running on the concavity of the duodenum because they will supply both the duodenum and the pancreas. One of the common diseases that affect the stomach, the esophagus and the duodenum is peptic ulcer. قرحة. معنى كلمة ulcer هو loss of epithelium, damage to the epithelium and erosion into the subepithelial tissue. طبعا هذا حسب pain, bleeding, infection, inflammation. The term peptic means that the source of the ulceration, the cause of the ulceration is the gastric acid. So if we have reflux of gastric acid into the esophagus, this will cause esophageal ulcer. If it happens in the stomach, we call it a gastric ulcer. It may happen in the duodenum and this is called duodenal ulcer, and most commonly this affects the first part or the first inch of the duodenum known as the duodenal cap or the duodenal ampulla. Gastric ulcer, esophageal ulcer may become cancerous, may become malignant, but not duodenal ulcers. Other complications include bleeding, and a serious and maybe fatal complication is perforation. Perforating ulcer. Perforation يعني راح تخترق الوول بشكل كامل. It will penetrate the entire wall of the stomach or esophagus or duodenum. And in the stomach, posterior perforation is more dangerous than anterior perforation because we saw in the posterior relation that the splenic artery was running behind the stomach, so an ulcer may erode this artery, may damage the artery and lead to fatal bleeding. هسه نكمل ويا بقية small intestine. عادة بنقول كلمة small intestine نقصد بيها jejunum and ileum. duodenum واحدة نخلي. The important thing for the jejunum and ileum for you as a doctor or as a surgeon is to differentiate them from each other. من الجراح يفتح بطن المريض وراح يشوف قدامه تيوب كامل صوندة طويلة 3 to 6 meters maybe more of the small intestine surrounded by peritoneum. اثنيناتهم هم intraperitoneum. شلون يفرق بين الججنوم والإيليوم؟ نعتمد على عدة نقاط. هاي الصورة كلش كافية إنه تخلينا نفرق بين الججنوم والإيليوم. First of all, the position. The jejunum is mostly in the left upper part or left upper quadrant of the abdomen, and it is shorter. قلنا هو يمثل خمسين طول small intestine. The ileum is the right lower part and it is longer, 3/5 of the small intestine, but this is variable. هذا الشيء مو ثابت because they are intraperitoneal, they may mix with each other and they move all around the abdominal cavity. فناخذ other factors. Secondly, we feel the wall of the jejunum and ileum مثل الصوندا نلزمها ونضغطها. We find that the jejunum has a thicker wall than the ileum. دخن مع الوول أقوى بالجejunum من ileum. And most importantly is the arterial supply. We depend on differentiating by seeing the arterial supply. The jejunal and ileal arteries قبل لا توصل إلى الجejunum والإيليوم يستوي بيناتها أنستوموسيس على شكل أقواس. هاي الأنستوموسيس نسميها the arterial arcades أو arches. من هاي الارتيريال arcades راح تطلع عندي straight arteries towards the jejunum or ileum. هاي ال straight arteries نسميها vasa recta. وبين هاي ال straight arteries راح يكون فراغات. هاي الفراغات نسميها peritoneal window. In the jejunum there is only 1 to 2 rows of arterial arcades. يعني عدد الارتيريال arcades قليل مقارنة بالإيليوم. الإيليوم انه يلقى 4 سروات 5 سروات من الارتيريال arcades. And the vasa recta are sparse, they are widely separated بعاد عن بعض الفاسا ريكتا. فلهذا تكون peritoneal window واضحة بالجejunum. بينما بالإيليوم the vasa recta are close to each other, so the peritoneal window are narrow. هذه من أهم الفروق بين الجejunum والإيليوم. If we look to the inside of the jejunum or ileum مثلا نسوي ناظور endoscopy أو فتحنا الأورجن during dissection, we can differentiate by the look of the mucosa. كل ما نكون more proximal circular folds اللي هي like circularis تكون أوضح. كل ما نقترب من نهاية الإيليوم mucosal lining يصير smooth. So this is the proximal jejunum. You can see there are many mucosal folds, circular folds. In the ileum they are less, and in the terminal part of the ileum it is almost smooth. And number 2, in the submucosa there are scattered lymphoid tissue. In the jejunum the lymph tissue or lymph nodules are scattered, solitary nodes. But in the terminal ileum these lymph tissue nodes will aggregate and form patches known as Peyer's patches. So, depending on the position, the length, the thickness of the wall, the shape of the arterial supply, the mucosal folds, and the lymphatic distribution are the main differences between the jejunum and ileum. And of course, because they are part of the midgut, all of these arteries, the jejunal arteries, the ileal arteries, are branches from the superior mesenteric artery. One of the common abnormalities or diseases of the small intestine is known as Meckel's diverticulum. The word diverticulum means a blind tube arising from another tube or another cavity. منين اجت هاي الدايفرتيكولم؟ هي هاي تصير بالإيليوم. You know from your embryological study that during one point of development the gut tube is connected to the yolk sac by a duct. This duct is called the vitelline duct. Normally this duct should regress and disappear completely. In some people it does not disappear completely and it remains, part of it remains attached to the ileum. The rule of Meckel's diverticulum is known as the rule of the twos. قانون الاثنين. شنو rules of the twos? It occurs in 2% of people. من كل 100 شخص اكو 2 عندهم Meckel's diverticulum. Its location is 2 feet from the ileocecal junction. يعني إذا أروح إلى منطقة التقاء الإيليوم بالسيكم وأرجع تقريبا 60 سنتيمتر إلى الخلف راح أشوف مكان وجود Meckel's diverticulum, and it is about 2 inches long. الطول مالتها تقريبا 5 سنتيمتر. This may cause inflammation, ulceration, even herniation. It may be attached to the umbilicus. إلها مضاعفات هواية. إلى حد هنا احنا نكون كملنا ل small intestine. أتصور كافي. بالفيديو الثاني إن شاء الله راح نكمل بقية الgut tube with the large intestine.